The marriage did not end with shouting. It ended with paperwork. The conference room sat on the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking downtown Manhattan, high enough that the city looked orderly from above. Cars moved like obedient lines. People shrank into dots. From up there, consequences always felt theoretical. Julian Mercer liked that height. He sat at the head of the table with his jacket still on, one arm draped casually over the leather chair, his posture relaxed in a way only a man with leverage could manage. The room was cold, deliberately so. Corporate air conditioning was a subtle language, and Julian spoke it fluently. Cold rooms made negotiations faster. They made people want to leave. Across from him sat Eleanor Mercer. She wore a gray wool coat that had seen too many winners and not enough compliments. No jewelry. No makeup beyond the minimum required to look awake. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely folded, as if she were waiting for a bus rather than dissolving a marriage. Julian did not look at her. He checked his watch instead. "I have a call with the board in 40 minutes, he said, not unkindly, not loudly, just factually. Let's be efficient. The attorney slid the folder across the table. Thick, final, everything reduced to ink. Eleanor did not reach for it. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable for the lawyer, but not for Julian. Silence had never bothered him. He had learned early that the person who spoke first usually lost. "For the agreement," the attorney said, clearing his throat, "Mrs. Mercer receives a condo in Astoria, the 2014 Honda, and a one-time settlement of $10,000. In exchange, she waives all claims to Mercer Logistics, its subsidiaries, and any future earnings. $10,000. Julian almost smiled. That number mattered to him, not because it was generous, but because it wasn't. It sent a message. It told the world exactly what he believed her contribution had been worth. Across the table, Claire Reynolds shifted in her seat. Claire wasn't just sitting in on the meeting. She had positioned herself there. Vice President of Marketing, sharp dresser, sharper smile. The kind of woman who laughed easily and never apologized for it. Her perfume had been on Julian's shirts for months, though Eleanor had never said a word. Claire lifted her coffee and took a slow sip. "It's more than fair," she said lightly. "Considering..." Julian finally glanced up. Eleanor's eyes met his. Not pleading, not angry, just searching, as if she were still checking whether the man in front of her was the one she had married. "Is this what you want?" Eleanor asked quietly. 3 years. I helped you build a routing system when you couldn't afford consultants. I stayed up nights while you worked. Julian laughed. It was a short sound, dismissive, practiced. "Sentimentality doesn't belong in contracts," he said. "And let's not rewrite history. You supported me emotionally. That's it. I needed a wife, not a partner." Claire smiled into her cup. Julian leaned forward, lowering his voice as if offering advice rather than issuing judgment. "Look at you," he continued. "You were comfortable being small. You never wanted more. That's fine for some people. But I'm building something. I need a woman who understands power." Eleanor did not interrupt him. He mistook that for agreement. "You'll be fine," Julian added. "Find someone who appreciates domestic stability. There are plenty of men who need that." The word domestic landed like a label. The attorney slid a pen across the table. Eleanor looked at it for a moment. Then she shook her head. "I don't need yours." She reached into her purse and pulled out a fountain pen, black, simple, almost unimpressive. When it caught the light, there was a faint violet shimmer beneath the surface, like something hidden just out of view. Julian barely noticed. "Sign," he said. "Let's not drag this out." Eleanor opened the folder. She did not read a single page. She signed. No pause, no hesitation, no tremor, The sound of the pen scratching across paper was louder than it should have been. Then she closed the folder and stood. "The car is in your name," she said calmly. "I left the keys with reception. I don't want the money." Claire laughed outright. "High road now," she said. "That's adorable." Eleanor finally turned her head. "I'd worry less about me," she said evenly, "and more about the audit coming out of Chicago, the one that flags missing marketing funds." The room went still. Claire's smile froze. Julian stood abruptly. "What did you just say?" Eleanor looked at him for the last time. "When you understand what you signed today," she said, "don't look for me." She walked out. The door closed softly behind her. Julian exhaled, shaking his head with a grin that bordered on relief. "Finally free," he muttered. He did not know that freedom, like height, only feels safe until gravity remembers you. Julian Mercer did not feel victorious until the elevator doors closed. Only then did the tension leave his shoulders, the faint, irritating pressure he had carried for months dissolving into a quiet sense of relief. He loosened his tie as the car descended, watching his reflection in the polished steel walls. He looked good, successful, untethered. He told himself that was what happiness felt like. The lobby of Mercer Logistics buzzed with the controlled chaos of a company that believed in its own momentum. Phones rang. Assistants moved briskly. Screens flashed shipment routes across North America. Chicago to Dallas, Long Beach to Newark, Seattle to Atlanta. Julian walked through it all like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet, because he believed he did. His assistant looked up as he passed. "Your 10 o'clock moved to 11. The bank confirmed the extension review for this afternoon." Julian waved a hand. "Fine." He stepped into his office and poured himself a glass of 18-year scotch, the kind he reserved for good days. The city sprawled beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows, confident and obedient. From up here, nothing ever looked threatening. Claire arrived minutes later, closing the door behind her with deliberate slowness. "It's done?" she asked. Julian lifted his glass. "Signed and sealed." She crossed the room and kissed him, brief and sharp, like punctuation. "Good. About time." She sat on the edge of his desk, confidence fully restored now that Eleanor was gone. "You should have done it sooner. Dead weight kills momentum." Julian nodded. He had already begun rewriting the story in his mind. Eleanor had been a phase, a support structure, necessary once, irrelevant now. The phone rang. He ignored it. Then it rang again. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Julian, it's First Continental. They're asking for you directly." "Put them through," he said, annoyed. The line clicked. "Mr. Mercer." A man said, breathless, controlled panic bleeding through professional tone. "This is Daniel Wright, Senior Credit Officer. We've received a notice from Sterling Global Holdings." Julian frowned. Sterling Global was a ghost, silent capital, faceless, powerful. 60% of Mercer Logistics' expansion funding traced back to them through layered entities. He had never met anyone from Sterling. That was the point. "And," Julian asked, "they've initiated a full recall." Julian laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking, sir. They've invoked a morality clause. Effective immediately." Julian's hand tightened around the glass. "There is no morality clause." "There is," Wright said quietly, "and it requires a continued approval of a senior Sterling family representative." Julian felt something shift, subtle but unmistakable. "I don't know any Sterling family," he said. "Fix it." Silence. "Mr. Mercer," Wright continued carefully, "they informed us that the representative has been living in your residence for 3 years." The glass slipped from Julian's hand. It shattered against the hardwood floor, amber liquid spreading toward the rug. "What?" he whispered. The authorization came from Eleanor Sterling. The name landed wrong. Not Eleanor Mercer. Sterling. Claire's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she said. "She's nobody. She—" Julian's mind raced backward through memory. Eleanor correcting spreadsheets over dinner. Speaking fluent French on the phone when she thought he was asleep. Quietly fixing routing inefficiencies he couldn't explain. "Pull the board call," Julian snapped. "I need to find her." "Sir," Wright said, "they're demanding repayment by end of business. If not, they seize the assets," Julian finished. The line went dead. Julian grabbed his jacket and ran. The street outside the building was clogged with traffic, horns blaring, taxis weaving. Eleanor's Honda was gone. In its place sat a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, idling like a patient predator. A uniformed driver held the door open. Eleanor stood beside it. The gray coat was gone. In its place, a tailored white suit cut with precision Julian had never seen before. Italian. Bespoke. Her posture had changed too. No longer folded inward, no longer small. Julian pushed past the driver. "Eleanor," he said, breathless. "What is this?" She turned slowly. "You wanted efficiency," she said calmly. "This is efficient. You lied to me." "No," she replied. "I tested you." The driver opened the door. "You signed willingly," Eleanor continued. "You mocked me willingly. That was the only data I needed." Julian reached for her arm. The driver stepped between them. "Don't," Eleanor said softly. "When the board calls, you'll understand." The door closed. The car pulled away. Julian stood in the street, surrounded by noise, watching the taillights vanish. His phone began vibrating nonstop. The city no longer looked obedient. It looked indifferent. By noon, Julian Mercer's name stopped opening doors. The first sign was silence. Phones that normally rang before the second tone now rang 5, 6 times before dropping into voicemail. Calendar invites vanished without explanation. His assistant stopped making eye contact. Even the hum of the office, keyboards, footsteps, the low mechanical reassurance of productivity, thinned into something brittle. He stood at the window, jacket still on, staring at the Hudson River as if it might offer clarity. Barges moved steadily below, indifferent to reputation, unbothered by collapse. They followed routes that had existed long before Julian Mercer learned the word logistics. The board call began without him. When he forced his way in 15 minutes late, faces filled the screen in tight, anxious rectangles. Men and women who had once laughed at his jokes now sat rigid, eyes darting, hands folded as if in prayer. What the hell is going on? Julian demanded. No one answered immediately. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "Sterling Global has withdrawn all guarantees." "I'm aware," Julian snapped. "We're negotiating." "No," the chairman said quietly. "You're not." The word landed heavier than it should have. "Our credit lines are frozen," another director added. Chicago flagged irregularities in marketing spend. The SEC has requested preliminary documents. Julian laughed again, louder this time. "That's ridiculous. Marketing reports to Claire." Claire Reynolds resigned this morning." The chairman interrupted. "She retained counsel." Julian felt heat rise in his chest. "She can't just—" "She did," someone else said, "and she brought receipts." The screen filled with documents. Emails, transfers, timestamps. Julian recognized his own forwarded approvals. His casual looks fine responses. His signature at the bottom of things he had never read. "You're telling me this is on me?" he said, incredulous. Silence. The kind that answers without words. The chairman leaned closer to the camera. Julian, Sterling invoked Clause 14b. Character and integrity. They provided testimony. Julian swallowed. Testimony from who? A pause. From your ex-wife. The word ex sliced deeper than air ever could have. The call ended abruptly. Within minutes, Mercer Logistics' stock ticker began to slide. Not a crash. Not yet. Just a controlled descent. The kind that looks survivable until it isn't. Julian paced his office, dialing number after number. Banks. Consultants. Friends. No one picked up. At 1 o'clock, security arrived. Not police. Corporate. 2 men in gray suits, polite, firm, eyes already past him. We're here to inventory company property, one said. Effective immediately. Julian stared. You can't do that. I'm the CO. For now, the man replied. They unplugged his desktop. Removed files. Logged serial numbers. The office shrank around him. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire. They walked into my apartment with badges. I told them everything. I'm sorry. Julian dropped into his chair. Outside, cameras gathered. By 3 o'clock, the headline broke. Mercer Logistics under federal review after sudden loss of primary backer. By 4, commentators were speculating. By 5, the word fraud appeared on screen. Julian left the building through a side entrance. Collar up, head down. The city he once ruled no longer recognized him. A taxi driver hesitated before letting him in, eyes flicking to the scrolling news feed on his dashboard. Where to? The driver asked. Julian gave his penthouse address out of habit. The driver nodded slowly, uncertain. When they arrived, the doorman did not meet his eyes. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. The apartment door opened to noise. Movers. Boxes. Men in uniforms lifting art off walls, rolling rugs, tagging furniture. Julian froze. What is this? He demanded. A man with a clipboard glanced at him. Mr. Mercer? Yes. Change of ownership. We were instructed to clear the unit. Julian's breath hitched. By who? The man checked the clipboard. Eleanor Sterling. The name echoed. Julian stumbled into the living room. His furniture, his life, being dismantled piece by piece. Then he saw the tablet propped on the counter. It was already playing. Eleanor stood on screen, calm, composed, holding a glass of wine. The background was unmistakable. The penthouse, moments earlier, now emptied. By the time you see this, she said evenly, the locks will have been changed. Julian's hand shook. The lease was never in your name, Eleanor continued. It was held by a holding company. Mine. I also pay for most of what you're wearing. Check the jacket pocket. Julian reached inside. A receipt. Her name. He slid down against the counter, chest heaving. Tonight, Eleanor said, is the Sterling Winter Gala. The entire industry will be there. I'll be announcing new leadership. She paused. If you come prepared. The screen went dark. Julian sat alone in a stripped apartment. City lights blinking without warmth. For the first time, the idea crept in, not panic, not fear, but something colder. He had not misjudged a woman. He had misjudged scale. The Sterling Winter Gala was designed to be seen. It took place at the Grand Metropolitan Opera House, a limestone monument sitting at the edge of Lincoln Center. Its steps wide enough to stage power, its doors tall enough to remind guests that money had learned how to imitate divinity. Floodlights cut through the early evening air. Barricades held back the public. Black cars arrived in smooth succession, each disgorging influence wrapped in tailored fabric. This was not a party. It was a ledger. Every arrival was counted, every absence noticed. Julian Mercer arrived alone. He came in a hired sedan because the driver did not ask questions. The tuxedo he wore had been pulled from the back of his closet, wrinkled at the shoulders, faintly smelling of storage. He stepped onto the edge of the red carpet with his chin lifted, performing confidence the way an actor performs grief. Technically correct, emotionally hollow. A photographer glanced at him, then away. That was the first cut. At the entrance, a security guard held a tablet. Name, the guard said. Julian Mercer. Julian replied. CEO, Mercer Logistics. The guard scrolled, paused, looked up. You're not on the list. Julian frowned. Check again. The guard did. Slowly, deliberately, still not on the list. A few nearby guests turned their heads. A camera lens angled slightly in his direction, sensing potential. I was invited, Julian said sharply, by Eleanor Sterling. The guard's expression changed, not into hostility, but into something worse. Recognition. I have orders, he said. No entry. Julian felt heat creep up his neck. You know who I am. I know who you were, the guard replied. Laughter rippled somewhere behind him. Quiet, controlled. Julian took a step forward. A hand landed on his shoulder. Strong. Casual. He turned to see Gabriel Wright. Midnight blue tuxedo. Perfect fit. The kind of ease that came from never having to prove legitimacy. Let him in, Gabriel said mildly. The guard nodded immediately. Of course, Mr. Wright. Julian shrugged the hand away. I don't need favors. Gabriel smiled. Not warmly. The jester should always be present, he said. It completes the ceremony. Inside, the opera house glowed. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from balconies. Crystal chandeliers caught the light and fractured into elegance. Conversations hummed in practiced tones. Champagne flowed like Assumption. Then the orchestra stopped. The room stilled. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice boomed. Please welcome the new chairwoman of Sterling Global Holdings. Julian turned. Eleanor appeared at the top of the grand staircase. The woman who descended was not the woman who had folded laundry in silence. She wore gold silk that caught the light like liquid currency. Diamonds rested at her throat, unashamed. Her posture was unyielding, her expression unreadable. She did not scan the room for approval. She expected it, and received it. Applause filled the space, rising, swelling, obedient. Julian pushed forward, forcing his way through bodies that no longer parted for him willingly. Adele, he began, then corrected himself. Eleanor. The music cut. The silence was absolute. Eleanor turned slowly. Her gaze landed on him the way one might notice debris on glass. Security, she said calmly, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Laughter broke out. Controlled. Surgical. Julian's voice cracked through it. You think this changes anything? You're still the woman who cried when I forgot her birthday. A murmur moved through the crowd. Eleanor stepped closer. I did cry, she said. Not because you forgot, but because I realized I had married a man incapable of seeing value unless it reflected his own. A waiter handed her a microphone. She accepted it. I entered my marriage under an alias, Eleanor continued, addressing the room. I wanted to know if love existed without leverage. What I learned was simpler. She looked at Julian. For some men, affection is transactional, and Julian Mercer bounced a check. The screen behind her lit up. Emails, financial transfers, bribes, safety violations. Julian's breath came shallow. And since we're here, Eleanor added, we might as well be thorough. A final document appeared. Gasps. Claire Reynolds is pregnant. Eleanor said evenly, the father is not Julian Mercer. It's his attorney. They plan to bankrupt him and disappear. Julian staggered back. Security closed in. "Get him out," Eleanor said. They did. Dragged him to the back corridor. Cameras catching fragments, his face flushed, his dignity unraveling. Outside, rain pooled in the alley. Julian hit the ground hard. Applause echoed faintly from inside the opera house. A pair of polished shoes stopped in front of him. "Mr. Mercer," a voice said, "you're under arrest." Handcuffs clicked. Julian looked back at the building one last time. Inside, Eleanor was smiling at someone else. The doors closed. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and old breath. Julian Mercer sat on the metal bench with his hands cuffed in front of him, wrists already chafed raw. The tuxedo he had worn to the gala, once a symbol of belonging, hung loose on his frame now, damp at the cuffs, stained where he had hit the alley floor. His shoes were gone. Someone had taken them early, quietly, efficiently. The room hummed with fluorescent light. No windows, no clocks. Time here was not measured in minutes. It was measured in humiliation. A man across from him snored softly, face pressed to the concrete wall. Another paced in slow circles, muttering to himself. Julian did neither. He sat very still, eyes fixed on nothing, replaying the night in fragments that refused to assemble into a narrative he could control. He told himself this was temporary. He told himself he was Julian Mercer, not a number. He told himself someone would fix this. When the guard finally appeared, Julian lifted his head instinctively. "Visitor," the guard said. Hope surged before Julian could stop it. They led him down a corridor that smelled cleaner, colder, into a small interview room divided by a table bolted to the floor. Julian expected a public defender. Overworked, underpaid, apologetic. Instead, the man waiting for him was already seated, hands folded neatly, posture relaxed. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that looked untouched by the outside world. Silver hair, combed back with precision. A thin scar ran through one eyebrow, old and deliberate. He was smoking despite the sign on the wall. The guards did not object. Julian hesitated. "Sit," the man said calmly. Julian obeyed. "Who are you?" Julian asked, voice hoarse. The man studied him with mild curiosity. "Sebastian Vale." The name settled slowly. Then all at once, Julian's stomach dropped. Sebastian Vale did not build companies. He dismantled them. He specialized in distressed assets and desperate men. He appeared only when something was already dying. "I can help you," Vale said. Julian laughed weakly. "You're too late. Eleanor took everything." Vale smiled. "She took what you thought mattered." He slid a folder across the table. "Your charges," Vale continued. "Fraud, conspiracy, regulatory violations. 20 years conservatively." Julian's hand shook. "I can make that disappear," Vale added. Julian looked up. "Why?" "Because," Vale said, "you lived with Eleanor Sterling for 3 years." The surname landed heavier now. "You know her habits," Vale went on. "You know where she hides what matters." Julian shook his head. "I don't know anything." Vale leaned forward slightly. "Think harder." A memory surfaced. Eleanor writing every night in a small red notebook. He had mocked it once, called it childish. She had smiled and closed it. "The journal," Julian whispered. Vale nodded. "The ledger." Julian swallowed. "She keeps it behind a painting in the master suite at the estate." Vale pushed the contract closer. "Sign," he said. "You walk out tomorrow. 10 million cash." And the satisfaction of watching her fall. Julian stared at the pen. He thought of the gala, the laughter, the way Eleanor hadn't looked back. His pride hardened into something toxic. He signed. The next morning, the news cycle shifted. Procedural errors. Evidence mishandled. Bail granted. Julian walked out of the courthouse in a borrowed suit, cameras flashing, jaw set. He told himself he was back in control. At the Sterling estate, Eleanor watched the footage in silence. Gabriel right stood behind her, arms crossed. "Vale doesn't stop," he said. "He'll come for blood." Eleanor's expression did not change. "He already has," she replied. "He just doesn't know it yet." 3 nights later, the storm hit. Rain battered the countryside. Wind tore through trees. The estate's lights flickered, then steadied under generator power. Eleanor sat in the library, dressed not in silk, but black tactical fabric. Her hair pulled back, movements precise. "They're cutting the perimeter," Gabriel said quietly, entering with a suppressed pistol in hand. "Vale's people, ex-military." "And Julian?" Eleanor asked. "He's with them." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "Let them in," she said. The master's sweet door burst inward with control force. Julian led the team through the darkness, breath shallow, nerves screaming. He pointed to the mirror, the hidden safe, his confidence returning with every step. The safe opened. Inside lay the red book. Vale grabbed it, hands trembling with anticipation. He flipped it open. Stopped. The pages were filled with crayon drawings. A child handwriting. A girl holding hands with her parents. Julian stared. "That's not—" Eleanor stepped into the doorway. "That book," she said calmly, "was my mother's gift. You thought it was leverage because you never understood value." Vale snarled. "Where's the real ledger?" "There isn't one," Eleanor replied. "It was bait." Vale raised his hand. "Kill them." Flashbangs detonated. The room exploded into light and sound. Agents flooded in. Vale went down screaming. Julian was tackled, pinned, disarmed. Eleanor walked to Julian slowly. He looked up at her, hope flickering one last time. "I just wanted to matter," he whispered. She placed a fountain pen, the same one he had mocked, into his jacket pocket. "It's been recording since the divorce," she said softly. "Everything." Julian closed his eyes. Outside, sirens wailed. The courthouse steps were wet with early morning rain, the kind that didn't wash anything clean but made the stone darker, heavier, more honest. Julian Mercer stood between 2 federal marshals, wrists cuffed, suit pressed but ill-fitting now, as if it belonged to someone else. The cameras waited at a respectful distance. There was no frenzy left, no appetite for spectacle. His story had already been consumed. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and wood polish. The judge entered without ceremony. The room rose, then sat. Julian remained standing, shoulders squared, jaw tight, performing dignity out of habit more than belief. The charges were read slowly. Wire fraud, conspiracy, securities violations, accessory to domestic terrorism. Each word stacked weight on his spine. Julian listened without interruption. Somewhere in the litany, he stopped hearing numbers. Years blurred together. 15, 20, 25. The math no longer mattered. The shape of the outcome had already formed. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Julian lifted his head. He looked toward the gallery. Eleanor Sterling sat alone in the second row. She wore black, not mourning black, neutral black, the kind worn by people who had already processed grief and moved on to resolution. Her posture was relaxed, hands folded loosely, eyes steady. Julian swallowed. "I made mistakes," he said. His voice sounded smaller than he expected. "I trusted the wrong people. I lost sight of what mattered." The judge did not react. Eleanor did not react. Julian waited for something. Recognition, anger, regret. Anything that would confirm he had once occupied space in her mind. Nothing came. The judge spoke. The sentence was delivered without flourish. 15 years. Federal custody. No early release. Assets forfeited. Restitution ordered where possible. The words were procedural, almost dull, which somehow made them worse. The gavel struck. Julian was led away. Eleanor did not watch him go. 3 months later, the Mediterranean was calm. The Sterling yacht rested just off the coast of Monaco, white against blue, massive without being ostentatious. On deck, Eleanor sat beneath a wide umbrella, a newspaper folded neatly beside her. The headline was small now. Julian Mercer accepts plea deal. Sentenced to 15 years. Below it, another line. Sebastian Vale receives life sentence without parole. Eleanor folded the paper. Gabriel Wright stepped beside her, setting 2 glasses down gently. "It's finished," he said. She did not answer immediately. "I thought I'd feel something different," Eleanor said at last. "Relief. Satisfaction. And," Gabriel asked. She considered the horizon. "Justice is quieter than revenge." Gabriel nodded. He understood that language. "The board stabilized," he said. "The company's stronger now. Cleaner." Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out the red sketchbook. The edges were worn, the pages soft with age. She opened it to a drawing of a small girl, holding hands with 2 figures taller than herself. "That was the only thing Julian never owned," she said. Gabriel smiled faintly. "He never saw it." "No," Eleanor replied. "He never looked." The yacht's engine hummed softly as it turned toward open water. Far away, in a concrete facility surrounded by wire and silence, Julian Mercer sat on a narrow bunk, staring at the wall. The fountain pen rested in a plastic property bag, sealed and labeled. Its violet shimmer dulled under fluorescent light. He thought about the moment he signed. He thought about the laugh. He thought about the height of the city and how safe it had felt. And for the first time since the beginning, there was no one left to blame. Eleanor lifted her glass, not in celebration, in closure. The water stretched endlessly ahead. Power, once reclaimed, did not need witnesses. It only needed permanence.